guy in the pith helmet, surrounded by cannibals, bones through their noses. Is that what people think of you when they think missionary?
I'm probably the most unqualified person out there to be called missionary. We weren't the first ones God called to this village we went to in Kenya, Debunking village. We were just the first ones to say yes. And one day my wife comes back from a little homeschool co-op, and she's like, I met a lady from Kenya, and she's been trying for 19 years to get water in her village. She says, I think you can help her. I don't know anything about getting water. I mean, I've been in construction. I've never drilled a well. And I told her what began to be our motto. I don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to do something. And so that was really the beginning of Commission Mankind, was hearing the need and saying, let's at least go check it out. And so here was God opening the door. And I was like, well, I got to listen.
Missions Pulse. Know God's heart, join his mission. This podcast is powered by unreached Global. Subscribe, watch, and listen on YouTube today. Visit missionspulse.com.
Welcome back to Missions Pulse, where we encourage you to know God's heart and join his mission. I know that you're excited about that. If you've been lingering around this podcast at all, maybe you're listening just to the audio or you're on YouTube, I pray that you're encouraged and inspired. What's been such an amazing journey is seeing these different people join me in conversation. And really what makes a podcast powerful is its guests. I'm just along for the ride along with you. So I'm really excited about this particular episode because we're going to be talking about some unique things that are taking place in the world. And I think you're going to be challenged and inspired. I encourage you to like this podcast, subscribe on YouTube, do it right now. You see that link right there. Whoops, right there. So anyway, yes, I'm excited to talk to my guest today. We just recently connected and are going to be getting to know each other right in front of you. Join us. And with that, here's my guest, Joye Dicharry. Sorry. Man, welcome to the show.
Well, it's good to be here. You're a lot more than just a podcast host. I mean, you're really a missionary too, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's my first. I know that word is loaded, but man, I am clinging hard to it, just like I'm clinging hard to the word evangelical. That's taken some hits and has pejorative meanings, like the missionary, you know, that guy in the pith helmet, surrounded by cannibals, bones through their noses. Is that what people think of you when they think missionary?
I'm probably the most unqualified person out there to be called missionary, but I probably give it a different face. Yeah. Probably not the best ways, but I know I'm being used by God, and I know I'm everything he's called me to be. So,
well, I mean, the beard helps. I know you said the beard doesn't make the man, right? But
yeah, I mean, they call me John the Baptist in Kenya just because the beard is funny.
Nice. When I first went to China, I was 18 years old. I bought a one-way ticket to China when I was 18 in 1998. I was like pre-internet, signed up for my first email in China. But my hair was down to my shoulders. I had a big beard, and I'd lug this large 3-part projector and screen and battery pack to show the Jesus film in all these villages. And they'd be watching, and it'd get to the scene where Jesus is walking around, and they'd be looking at me, like looking back. Shutama. I speak in Chinese. Is that him? It was. You go into an unreached area, and
right.
It was very confusing for my listeners initially.
We've seen that a little bit. We brought the Jesus film to some tribes, and they get to the part of killing Jesus, and these guys got spears and swords on them. We were looking around like, let's make sure this stays kind of calm, keep an eye on everything.
When you say that, it reminds me of like the Don Richardson Pete's Child story. I mean, he arrives with his little baby Steve and his wife, and surrounded by all these people who are headhunters. I mean, this is remarkable, the people who have gone before us. And here we are just in this long line of people who said yes to God. Well, what does that mean for you? I mean, are you someone special as a missionary? Some people might think.
No, we're just called. And actually, our first year, we felt like my wife and I, she heard a word from God that we weren't the first ones God called to this village we went to in Kenya, Debunking village. We were just the first ones to say yes. And I think it's just saying yes and not in a sense saying like, oh, we're so weak, he's so strong, but we're so weak, but we're really strong because we're with him. And, it's the more we walk with him, the more we learn we have his strength. we don't walk in weakness, we walk in his strength. So we go and do things that are way beyond our abilities, way beyond our financial reach or anything. And so that's really part of it that's exciting for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that obedience is just a succession of small, willful steps. I think I wrote that in The Mind of a Missionary. Sometimes when I write, I look back on it later, and it's like what I needed to hear. I'm really just writing for me, and then I just stick a bunch of words between two covers and put on Amazon for someone else. But it's for me because I need to remember that it's not something magical, or God doesn't call the elite and the special forces, right? It's a willful succession of small steps in the footprints, after the footprints of our master. And thankfully he includes us in this journey.
Amen. I mean, that part about obedience, you say that word, and it's not something we take lightly, because we know the word says obedience is greater than sacrifice. And what I've learned is that we can sacrifice to do our own will for God and feel good about it every day. Like, you could suffer, you can work hard, you can strive at things that are your will, your plans to try to help God, and it just not be obedience. And obedience is the greatest sacrifice, because you're sacrificing your will for his. So obedience is greater than sacrifice, but it really is the greatest sacrifice.
And I think when you say that, a lot of people might maybe tune out because they think of obedience as drudgery, right? And It becomes like this thing that they've got to do, and we've got to, but along that journey comes this incredible joy of joining Jesus in this mandate. And I know you're the executive leader or director at Commission Mankind. Walk me through some of your story, because you're already debunking some myths about missionaries. Look at that. Strong shout out. I like shameless plugs.
Yeah, I'm drinking my cup of Commission Mankind. Are you drinking your cup of Within Reach Global?
Well, yeah, it's water. We make water over here. What do you guys got?
Black coffee, man.
Oh, bro.
Your beard out.
Well, all right. You're killing me over here, making me look bad. Okay, so lead up to you sitting here with your cup of Commission Mankind coffee. How did it all come to this?
So my wife and I, back in 2009, we had been serving on staff with our church for a while, and just really had a heart to see missions get back to the forefront. I grew up in a wonderful Christian home, wonderful parents that love Jesus with all their heart, really blessed, really gospel privileged. And
I've heard that term before.
But we saw missionaries come in, and they would put out artifacts, and we would touch things from India and from China and places, and we were like, wow, as kids seeing these things. And then one day all of that kind of stopped, and then missionaries began to be something that was just a video on a screen or some slides, and we send money and give an offering, and we no longer heard from missionaries coming into the church. So we sat down in 2009 and just began to pray and say, how do we get the next generation connected back to missions? What can we do? And we just began to pray and seek God, and God gave my wife the name Commission Mankind, with the idea that we've all been commissioned. All of mankind has been commissioned with this Great Commission. And so our heart's to complete the Great Commission by connecting every believer, with their abilities for God's kingdom. And so that was 2009. We wrote the vision down, and we just began to pray over it. And if you didn't know, I have 7 kids. So, and it's a lot to take care of. So as a provider for 7 kids in this society, it's a lot of work. And so the idea of saying, well, I'm going to leave providing for a family of 9 and go and be a missionary, because our heart was, if we're going to help connect missionaries to the body of Christ, then we need to go out and do missions work so we can understand this better. And so we began to look for places to go. We began to ask pastors to send us. My pastor even brought us to multiple places, other countries. We went and checked out, and just didn't work out. And so it was about a 9-year process of just searching. And then one day my wife comes back from a little homeschool co-op, and she's like, I met a lady from Kenya, and she's been trying for 19 years to get water in her village. She says, I think you can help her. I don't know anything about getting water. I mean, I've been in construction. I've never drilled a well. So I don't really know anything about that. And so I said, but I'll go talk to her. So I went and talked to her, and she asked me this question. She said, have you ever been thirsty and you couldn't find water? And it just kind of hit me because I'd never been in that situation. I'm a Cajun from Louisiana. We can't walk without stepping in a puddle of water. I've never had to go very far for water. And she said, well, imagine your children thirsty and you can't give them anything. And I told her what began to be our motto. I don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to do something. And so that was really the beginning of Commission Mankind, was hearing the need and saying, let's at least go check it out. So my wife and I went, that was in 2018. And in 2019, we went to visit Kenya. I stayed a little longer and visited Tanzania and South Sudan as well. And we went and we saw these children that were malnourished. We saw the village. We saw the area and we said, hey, we need to do this. And so, my wife had always been asking me to get to the mission field. And I told her, if God opens a door, I will run and skip and jump through it. But I'm not jumping through any walls because I'll hit a stud. I just know I'll hit something. So when he opens the door, I promise you, I will listen. And so here was God opening the door. And I was like, well, I got to listen.
Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I think the moral of the story here is listen to your wife, or God speaks to your wife more than the man, or men are sometimes, I speak for myself, maybe perhaps more dense, perhaps not hearing from God. I don't know what it is.
It's a responsibility that we carry sometimes. And I know for me, my wife is much more empathetic and I'm more assertive, but it makes a good balance when we're together. Yeah. And so I value the voice of God in her life and what she says to me. I value it deeply because I've seen the results of it. It's real. And so I knew that God was going to bring this, but she also knew that God was going to open the door in my life and I would sense it too. And so the next steps were like, well, I've got to leave my job. I've got to figure this all out. We got to be sent out. And that's the parts where I don't fit into the normal missionary category, where I didn't go get a degree in missionology and everything else that they have out there. There's good things out there and we need to study those things. But for me, God called us to just go. And it was interesting because the first year we went, we had churches giving towards us, but we had no guaranteed amount of support per month or anything. It was just, we're taking a family of 9. We have enough money for our tickets and that's going to drain the account. And we're going to try to do a well. We don't have any money for a well. And we're just I thought I could use my abilities. We were talking earlier about, obeying God with what we have. And you asked me that question about whether, I had the goods to be a missionary. And I went there thinking, as a project manager, I've done a lot of projects. I've led them to success. I've been successful in construction. I can go there and I can whip something up and I can help God out on this. And I'm like, all right, God, you picked the right guy. I'm going to take care of you on this one, God. We're going to hook up and I'm going to make it happen for you. And so I went there and not in a bad way, but it still wasn't the best way to say, hey, God, I want to go there and do my best with what I have for you. And so I went there with the idea, I'm going to get the government to drill because they have drilling rigs. So I went there and I was meeting with government officials. We're living in a house with no running water, no water at all, no power. I'm waiting behind donkeys for water for my own family. But I'm like, I'm going to go and I'm going to get the government to do this. This is what I do best. I can make things happen. And like 5 months of being there in this village and I don't have a well 1 inch in the ground and I don't have any money to drill a well. So people were like, well, just get a private company and go do it. And I was like, I don't have any money to do it. It's like $35,000. Yeah. And so they're like, well, you really came here with no money to do a well? And I'm like, yeah, kind of did. And so after 5 months of being there and fighting for the government to do this, I began to get angry. And I wasn't no longer a good friend of these politician guys after they lied and took money from me for so long. I was ready to punch these guys in the throat. I wasn't too happy with them. And God woke me up one morning and he was like, if you can't do this in love, I don't need you to do this. I'm like, what are you talking about, God? I moved my family out here to the wilderness. I'm going to bat for you, man. I'm like, come on. And God's like, look, I can make water come out the ground anywhere, but I can't represent myself on earth except through you.
Wow.
And you are my representation. And the people that you're the most angry with, these politicians, they're the ones I sent you to love.
Hmm.
And everybody else already doesn't love them because they've lied and cheated everyone else. But I was thinking that maybe you could go there and represent me to them. And so it was a eye-opening event. And so God's like, I need you to love them. So I thought for a second, okay, I'll love them. And then I'm like, nah, I don't think I really can. I'm not going to lie to you, God. I don't think I can love these guys, man. I mean, you ever have someone in your life, you're like, I just don't know if I can love them. It's better if we just kind of part ways and I just pray for them because I'm not sure if I can love them. And so I'm sitting
Absolutely.
there thinking this and I'm like, I don't think I can love them, God. And God's like, I know you can't. I've been
Hmm.
trying to teach you that for 40 years. And that was the day I realized I was incapable of completing God's will for my life.
Wow.
And I didn't know that up to that point. Up to that point, I was thinking, I'm going to use everything that I've learned in life and worked. And I've been around the world. I worked in Saudi Arabia. I've been in Japan. I've been these places doing work. I can use all of these skills to go and do this for God. And that day I realized all my best efforts, I was incapable of doing God's will.
Yeah.
And the best I could do would be to die to myself, the three loves, eros, phileo, and agape. And look, I don't care who you are, you're not capable of agape love. Like the best we can do is love with pretense. No matter me and you are friends, we like-minded in missions. You might steal an idea from me and make money off of it. I'm going to get mad at you.
Sure. Yeah. Finally, I have someone like super brutally honest on this podcast. I love it.
But it's a real conversation to say, are we really capable of agape love, or is it only our weakness that God's agape love flows through us? And so in this situation, the best I could say was that I'm only capable of agape love, of phileo love. Maybe I'm friends with you because you got some land I want to hunt on and I'm playing a long game. You just don't know it. And so
maybe
I'm like,
maybe you and Bill Johnson are going to show up on my land with your guns.
We might. You never know.
Step over my no trespassing signs, and then I'm going to be bad.
I always hunt Christian people's land. They got to forgive us, man. I hunt those Christian deer behind churches. Like the church has to forgive me. So I have one of my pastors looking at me like, he's like, "Are you shooting my deer over here?"
Going to hunting farms. Well, man, when you're talking about this, I mean, it brings back the reality of, I think of all these missionaries who've gone before and who were never the right type for missions. All the legends or the people that we look up to, missionaries of the past, historic missionaries, they were almost all of the ones who got, rejected by the missions agency. Amy Carmichael, Hudson Taylor didn't go well, right? I mean, nobody, Amy Carmichael, she had all the local missionaries around her holding up protest signs for the Get Amy Out of India campaign. And we look back in time thinking, Amy Carmichael, she's a legendary hero. And it kind of debunks the reality that, of course, there are some good ways to go. And there are, ways to address missionary attrition, because a lot of missionaries go and can't stay. There's ways to overcome that. But on the other hand, God has always used righteous deviants, misfits, run-of-the-mill ordinary folk. You remind me of a run-of-the-mill ordinary folk.
A misfit.
I mean that in the most positive way I can.
No, I love it. I love it, David, because I do. I think that when we look at the disciples that Jesus chose, and they weren't the ones that had all the goods that we would have looked at. But when Jesus looked at Peter and these fishermen, he didn't see fishermen. He saw who he created them to be. And he doesn't look at us as we see ourselves. He looks at us with what he's called us to do for his kingdom. So he never sees what we see. He only sees what he created us to do. And so he only sees the greatness that he set out in front of us. So, I mean, that right after that epiphany with God and things changed, I no longer tried to get things from the government done. I just went and said, hey, how's your family? How's your wife? How's your kids? And we didn't try to push them to get things done. And my wife got a word in Jeremiah that God was going to champion our cause. And a week later, somebody did a GoFundMe and we raised $30,000 to do the well privately in no time. Completely none of our doing. And, the next step was God showing me I didn't have to be something to be a missionary, because I was still feeling like, well, I'm doing well. We did a house for a widow. We did shoes for kids in the school. And I'm like, I got to prove to people that I'm a missionary and I'm not just a humanitarian aid worker, because we're doing missions work every day, but we're not putting it out there. And people may say, well, are you a missionary? Are you a humanitarian aid worker? Kind of, what are you doing? And that was like something I was really juggling with, and kind of hard for me to balance, because I wanted to be seen as a missionary, and I didn't feel like I was living up to it. So everywhere we drill a well, we do a baptismal. We do it on public land so all the churches can baptize. So the first well, we did this big baptismal, and we set up a big celebration service. And long story short, it was during COVID, and all the pastors wouldn't baptize, and I rebuked them all, but I agreed not to baptize if they wouldn't, because I didn't want to demise their leadership. So I'd been setting this up for a while. I had GoPro cameras. I had paid people from 3 a.m. to be heating water with wood and putting water in the baptismal so it's warm. And these pastors take the rug out from under me. 8 months of working to get to this day, that this is the day I'm going to prove I'm a missionary. We're going to baptize people. We're going to have the pictures of them coming out the water, all exciting, and this is going to be great. And the rug was just pulled out from under me. And I woke up the next day and I was just soaking. And I strapped my Bible to my dirt bike and I took off down the road to ride out, to just go try to read and pray. And it's about a 45-minute dirt bike ride to where the village is at, where we did the well, from where I live. And it's just donkey trails. It's not like a road. So I drove through the village. I didn't wave to nobody. They're all this brand new well site, excited. I just drive through and I go right past the Athi River, which flows down from the slums of Nairobi. Very polluted water. The original river that me and my wife went down and saw all these malnourished kids drinking polluted water and getting sick. And I sat down with just my Bible, and I'm sitting there. I'm like flipping the pages. You ever so mad you just can't read the Bible? I mean, you're probably a lot better person than me, but
oh yeah, probably at least 10% better.
10%. So I was just so mad I couldn't even read the Bible. So I'm just flipping the pages, and I don't even know where to start. And I'm just angry because my chance was blown. I was going to show everybody I was a missionary, and God's like, "What are you upset about?" I'm like, What am I upset about? Are you kidding me? I worked so hard to get to this point, and it was just taken away from me. And God was like, "What do you see?" And I'm like, I look around and I'm like, nothing. So he asked me a couple more times, "What do you see?" And if you know the rivers in Africa, it's really just dry sand except when it floods, and then there's trash 30 foot up in the trees because it just floods so much. So I'm looking around, I'm like, nothing, sand, water, trash, trees, and I'm just naming everything I see. And God said, "Where are all the people?" And he said, "Where are all the people that were drinking this dirty water?" He said, "Where are they?" And I just began to weep, and I sat there and wept and wept. And I got back on a dirt bike, and I'm driving up towards the top of the hill. And when you get up to the hill, because the river is about 4 miles down from the village, and I could just crest the hill and I could see yellow jerry cans just lined up where people were getting water from the well. And I just stopped my bike right there. And God said, "I sent you here to give people water. Are you okay with doing my will?" And I was like, "Yes, sir." And he's like, I was going to let you baptize, but I felt like you was going to get the glory. And if you get the glory, you got to take the judgment. He said, so I pulled the plug. So you wouldn't have to take the judgment. And then he asked me again, are you okay with just doing my will? And that day, everything changed for me, because it no longer mattered if I thought I was a missionary, or I thought I was doing what made me a missionary, or made this more than humanitarian work. What mattered was God told me, "I sent you to get these people water." Yeah. That was my will for your life, and you did what my will was. There was some more things that you wanted to do, but they were really just to prove to yourself. And I can handle that stuff other ways, but I don't want you to get misguided into going for the glory. And everything changed for me that day. I no longer cared if people said, "You're a missionary, you're a humanitarian aid worker." What I cared for was I doing the will of God. And that's all that mattered to me after that.
That's a powerful series of events. And I think everyone can kind of relate to that kind of thing where inside we feel like we have altruistic motivations for going to do some certain thing, but God knows he can do it better. And in the end, we refer back to Isaiah 26:12, all that I have accomplished, God, for you, you have done it for me.
That's right.
That scripture has meant a lot to my wife and I this year. And, but I wanted to ask you this, because you're talking about God saying, hey, I have this role for you, and it's to build water wells and to give water, and it's specific. I mean, why water? How do water well projects unlock gospel opportunities in your experience?
I think there's a lot of just people being unaware. I know I was personally unaware of the suffering for water and how much people walk and suffer for water. And it's kind of hard to go and preach the gospel to people that are thirsty and hungry and don't
Physically
have things.
Thirsty too, right?
Yeah, physically, I ask people this question: what's the furthest you've had to go for a glass of water? Was it the next exit, the next store? Was it your faucet? What is the furthest in your lifetime that you were thirsty as a kid, where you're running on a football field and you had to go to the sideline to get water? What was the furthest you've traveled for water? You got young girls walking 8 miles to go get water that they got to carry back, and it's polluted.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not sparkling after you arrive.
No, it's not sparkling. And so, I mean, for me, it Commission Mankind and all of those vision that we had wrote had never been about water. It was just that God told us to do this, and we did it. And we'll do more things. Water is just an avenue to help us bring the gospel. When we go to a community, Jesus would go and heal the sick and do miracles. And that's my goal, is to do that. And we've seen miracles. We've seen people healed. We've seen eyes open and ears healed. But when you go and like we went this year to the Hadzabe, an unreached tribe in Tanzania, and when we go there and say, they told us there was a God of the daytime and a God of the night, and they feared the God of the night. And I said, well, the God that sent us is the God of day and night, and he sent us by night to come here, which shows that he is over both of them. But I said, we came here to help you. And I said, this God loves you so much that he's going to bring water out the ground for you and show his love to you. So that chief got up and said, you have brought us the gospel with evidence, and we want to know more about your God. Wow. So then when we brought the solar audio Bibles and they got to hear it for the first time, they call God hyena is their word for God. They're a praying tribe that always prayed before they go hunting, but they didn't know anything about their God. They just know there's God. So now they're listening and they're saying with all their clicking, they talk with all this clicking. One guy's name was Long, Long, Long. And so I baptized him, long, long, long. And so I said, well, I got to see how God writes that in the Lamb's Book of Life, because I want to see how he writes it out, because it looks cool. But he's listening and he's saying, and I have this guy interpret it for me. And he's saying, I said, what is he saying? He said, he's saying, he always knew there was God, but you have brought us the words who tell us who God is.
Wow.
So it wasn't like we're introducing something new. It was evident through the world that there was a God. They just didn't know about him. And so here we are. They're listening to the Bible and like, this is God. So the water brings that opportunity to bring them together and say, I tell them, all the witch doctors that say they talk to God could not bring water out the ground. But the God that we serve loved you so much, he brought this water out the ground to show his love for you, that he cares for you. And so the water is a tool. Everywhere we go, we put a giant stone, says Jesus is the living water. And we drill mainly on public property now. We're drilling in Nepal now. We are drilling on private property there in churches, because it's a little different there. But in Kenya and Tanzania and South Sudan, we drill on public property so that all the churches can have access to the baptismal and use the water. And it's super exciting. But water, it's just one of the tools. God can use more, but water is his plan. It's not my plan. That's the interesting thing about water. It was never my plan, because all the things I've done in my life, which I thought was plenty, I never did water. So I was the last one that God should call. They're like, Joel, what do you know about water? I'm like, nothing. I mean, I know a lot now. I mean, I'm studying the geology and the rock formations and how to find it, because it costs a lot of money when you don't hit it. And so I'm learning a lot now, but God picked something that I was not even familiar with. I'm like, God, I'm bringing all this experience to the table, and you got to pick the thing I don't even know how to do.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So, yeah.
Well, okay. So, I mean, I've heard a lot of organizations, who are doing water. And namely, one of the first organizations that comes to mind is Charity Water. I mean, because their, promotions and advertising is killer. And so I've heard about that. What sets Commission mankind apart from these other organizations? I mean, you don't have to toot your own horn, but I already am getting a gist that you see water as a tool for the advancement of the gospel, or what kind of sets you guys apart then?
Yeah, our focus is not water. Our focus is the gospel, and water is a tool to get us there. So there was a time that I was kind of seeking in more funding. It could go to USAID and get grants and do a lot, and I could be drilling tons of wells, but then it would limit the amount of ministry I can do. And so we said, you know what? Every well we're going to do is going to be a testimony to the work of the kingdom and the giving of the church, and people that write a check for $10, that $10 is going to water. So the wells that we do are not funded by the government or grants. It's funded by people who believe in this message that's going out. And I think that we don't give enough credit to the fact that the kingdom of God can move the gospel forward. And I was telling my goal for last year, I said I want to do 60 wells. We've done 16 already. We're about to drill 5 more. And one of the pastors in Kenya, Reverend Benson, I told him, I said, I want to do 60 wells. And he knows that I know some of these billionaires in Kenya who haven't sponsored wells, but I know them and we're friends. And so when I told him I want to do 60 wells, they're $38,000 a piece. He's like, how are you going to fund that? And I said, I know a guy. And he's like, oh, so he was thinking, I'm thinking about these billionaires. I'm like, I know a guy, he owns a lot of cattle. Like he owns so much cattle, over 1,000 hills. I'm like, this guy's got money like you never seen. And so I said, look, my job's to obey God. He's like, what if you don't do 60 wells? It doesn't matter. I can't do one. So what's it matter? I'm just going to say yes to God, and whatever he does, he gets the glory for. But I'm going to say yes to every bit of it. And so we don't get afraid. This year we want to do a home for the sex trafficking victims at the India-Nepali border. That's going to be $100,000. But we don't get worried about what the cost is. We get worried about whether or not we're obeying the vision of God and what he's called us to do. His job is to provide, but it doesn't have to go. Charity Water and these companies, they're doing excellent things, and they need to be commended. I was meeting with some people from the Chris Long Foundation. They've drilled 100 wells in Tanzania yesterday. I was talking with them.
Wow.
And we can work together on identifying the places that need water the most. And so I was identifying some areas in Kenya that are suffering drought right now that need it the most. But what is different about us is that we're just part of this. The whole world can't be saved through Commission Mankind. We can't build Commission Mankind big enough to fix this need. We're just part of it. There's plenty more organizations like Commission Mankind that need to come up and do the same thing. Listen to God and obey them. They don't need to follow us. They need to follow God. That's what he told us to do. Don't go and look at what the people did before you. He said, listen to me. I'm going to guide you. And we did that. We went there. He guided us, and it's works. So we keeping the focus on letting the kingdom of God fund the gospel going forward. And we don't need to make Commission Mankind any bigger than God needs it to be for his purposes.
Yeah. I love how you're very clear on that focus. And that's what we need more than the humanitarian. I often have said that a lack of gospel access is the greatest injustice known to humankind. And I think that when you say that, people who are SJWs for a certain cause will get irritated because they're like, no, the greatest injustice is a lack of water or sex trafficking or whatever it is. But in my opinion, as I kind of been, seeking the Lord, it seems to me that a lack of gospel access, at least even the robust gospel, we've got plenty of the anemic version. And from that stems every other injustice. It's the root. Fallen mankind is the root of all injustices. And so, I'm not saying the Commission Mankind is greater than or better than another org,
Right.
But if we don't keep that focus gospel-centric, I mean, I look at here in Thailand, 194 years ago, as of this recording, the first missionaries arrived in 1828. And there was 0 to a handful of Christians at that time. And today, almost 200 years later, we have 0.77% Christian. We've gone from 0 to 0 in 200 years. I mean, that's a failed business model, or like a flat line on a hospital monitor. And I know God's done great things, and he's used people to advance his kingdom. I don't want to downplay those things whatsoever. But there is a tendency to in our educational and humanitarian and governmental and all other avenues of impacting or penetrating a society, to overlook the aspect of that gospel-centric, disciple-making, revelatory witness of who Jesus is. And I think that you guys are trying to do that.
Well, I think that what you said it boils down to where the gospel goes, it should transform the land.
Yeah.
And the humanitarian parts of it should be a fruit of the work of the gospel. Where the gospel
Absolutely.
goes, it shouldn't be this devastating poverty and sickness and all. That is not the work of the gospel. And so I believe where the gospel goes, the gospel, the saving power of Jesus Christ to change a man's life and death.
Yeah.
Where it goes, it should transform the land. So we believe that too. So part of it transforming the land is the water, but part of it is the lifestyle of saying husbands are going to be faithful to their wives. We're going to be faithful to God. We're going to seek his face. We're going to spend as much money on a Bible as we spend on our hair, our beards. We're going to make sure we have a Bible. And
it just piqued my interest about how much money you spend on your beard.
No, not much. So
okay, all right.
the truth is that like a Bible in Kenya costs $6, and it's probably the average wages for a day may be $3 in that country. But people will spend $10 or $15 to have their hair done, and guys will spend more than that at the bar in one night. And so it's like everybody's like, give me a Bible, give me a Bible, give me a Bible. And I'm like, well, how much do you value the Bible? Are you willing to take one day and not do something else that you did to get a Bible? And this is part of like transforming land. Where the gospel goes, there should be a hunger for Christ. And the results of the gospel is the transforming of the land. So I agree with you that you cannot separate the humanitarian aid from the gospel. The gospel work is key in everything that we do. And the water is a tool that is used to get us there. And it's very much needed. I think it was God's idea. It wasn't my idea. So
yeah. So you've mentioned a couple countries, a few countries that you're working in. How many places are you? How many countries are you working in right now?
We've been visiting a lot of countries recently, but actively we've drilled in South Sudan, Kenya, and Tanzania, and we're currently starting our first 3 well projects in South Sudan and Nepal, and funding 2 more. We're planning on doing some work in Paraguay, but we haven't begun that. As well as I'm heading to Honduras in another week to go look down there for some water projects as well. And I agreed to walk through every door that God opened for me. So we pray and seek God when he opens doors, whether he wants us to go, because we're not trying to spread too thin. But I've had one pastor call what we do more like hybrid missions, because we go to Kenya for 4 months a year. We go from April to August, and then we're home and exploring other places the rest of the season and sharing the testimonies. But and I know that there needs to be missions that are long-term planted. That is 100% needed. What we're doing is not the right way of doing missions, if there is a right way of doing missions. It's just this is one facet that God has called us to, and we're being obedient. And so our job is to go, encourage the ones that are out there, make connections, move the gospel forward, see the training of pastors, and then come back and share these testimonies. That's just specifically what God called us to do. It is not the only way. It is not the right way. I'm not telling other people to do what we're doing. Obey God in your life and what he's called you to do. We need the long-term planted missionaries. We love to bring church groups. We have 5 planned for 2023. We had multiple ones this year, bringing them in to get their hands to the plow, seeing the need for the gospel. And it's funny because what we normally do as a family is we go out and evangelize these schools and places, knocking on doors, praying for the sick, meeting needs. And then when teams come, we're not doing like a dog and pony show. We're bringing them out there and saying, okay, we have a family of 9, so there's only so many doors we can knock on. So with you here, you can knock on more doors. So they're doing the same thing we do when they come out there. So we don't bring people to do anything other than completely doing the work forward. And I think that if more missions programs did that, just let people come and participate in what you're already doing, they enjoy being useful. Yeah. And more than anything, the body of Christ wants to feel useful. I asked someone the other day, when was the first time you felt useful for God? And he was thinking back, and I think when I got saved, I was knocking on doors and witnessing to people. I said, God wants you to feel useful in the kingdom. And if you want to come on a trip to Kenya or somewhere else and and be used by God. God wants you to feel useful more than just a Sunday service.
It saddens me, though, that you have to invite them to the other side of the world for them to feel useful. Every citizen in God's kingdom is significant. And if you were to ask that question, I'd love to see a Barna report about that. Like, how many people feel useful in their
That's
church
right.
or feel like they are being used of God? And on that note, the byline of your website says, connecting you to world missions. So I see that you do a lot of short-term trips and you bring teams. Maybe some are longer than others. A lot of organizations have like a poor view of short-term missions trips. Like you just mentioned a minute ago, it's the pony show, and it's like come to experience something that's atypical of our daily life. What has been the positive or negative thing that you've seen for short-term missions? I think you're going to give me something positive. You can give me the negative too, but it seems to me you've experienced the positive side of it.
I don't have a negative because
Really? Okay,
it's
cool.
what God called us to do is connect the body of Christ to mission. So when you get to participate in what you're called to do, it's just all exciting. But
Hmm.
everyone that has already come a second time, and the people that
Wow.
have come a second time are coming again. And
Hmm.
so the churches that came, we had multiple churches have come. We had people from Bethany World Prayer Center, the pastor, Pastor Jonathan Stockstill, and his wife, and their children came. So we tell them, we want you to. Am I upside down on there or just on here, Nick?
No, you're still
Okay.
looking good on my side. You've been looking
Okay.
good the
Because it
whole
keeps
time,
flipping me
bro.
upside down on this thing. And I'm like, man, I hope I'm not upside down over there. But the idea is that we take people to places it's safe to bring your little children. My kids are young. They came when they were 3 years old on the mission field. And we tell people, bring your children. Missions is not for one person in the family to go to. Our whole family of missionaries, our children are missionaries. So we encourage whole families. So this year we had multiple whole families with all of their children. It came even last year, multiple families with a whole range of kids' ages that all came and participated in sharing the gospel story to schools, washing kids' feet that have never worn shoes in their life,
Wow, that's
praying for
awesome.
them. And that eye contact from 2 feet away to tell a child that you're loved, that you're cared about in a world that's so hard is so powerful. It transforms their life. So putting these people there and saying, okay, you're going to buy shoes for every kid in this school. We're going to go there. You're going to wash their feet. You're going to put shoes and socks. You're going to pray for them. And you're going to change their destiny. I think of that moment in the movie Les Miserables, or book if you've read it. But when the priest hands the stolen goods to the thief, and he's like, "With this gold, I've purchased your soul. You're going to be different." And I think of that moment of these kids of just saying, your destiny is going to be changed. You're going forward, and just letting the church participate in that. They come back, and everyone in that church is connected to at least 100 people. So then they want to get involved, and then they want to come back this year. So my wife and I just went to Nepal, and we got all these people that came to Kenya. Hey, when are you going to take us to Nepal? When are you come take us to Nepal?
Awesome.
And so I think there's a hunger to get out there and be used by God. So, and it was wild because we had these big whiteboards filled up with all our plans, and you know how it is in a country that's different. And Kenya's hard, and we have a lot of older 4x4 vehicles and dirt bikes we're riding around on to get these places. We got a lot of moving parts to move teams of 20 people around. And it's complicated and it's hard on people to be put in these situations. But we hit every stop that we had planned. Every ministry opportunity we had planned happened, which was blowing my mind. Had the little section of if we have the time. And we made all of those too. And then I was talking with the pastors. Hey, was it too much for your team? Did they loved it. They loved it
That's
all.
awesome.
And so I think that they wanted to do something where they felt they were actually being used to move the kingdom forward.
Yeah.
And they got that. Even my own pastors bringing in audio Bibles made for the first time in the Hadzabi language. We downloaded the files from archive.com. Wycliffe didn't have it in that language, and we sent it to them at Renew World Outreach. They put them on the Solar Bible, sent them to us. We got them over to them. And here's these people listening to the Bible in their language for the first time. People enjoy participating in that. Missions is exciting. It's an
Yeah.
adventure. It's fun. And it's what we're called to do. Everything we are called to do is to know him and make him known.
Hmm.
That is everything. The more we know him, the more he's made known.
I love such a positive energy about STMs, short-term missions, because I mean, as I was kind of writing the mind of a missionary, I was going through maybe the the transition of how we moved from long-term missionary. We never even had short-term missions until the 70s or 60s or 70s when OM, Operation Mobilization, and YWAM came in, Lauren Cunningham, and gave opportunities to all these people. Then I went to Teen Mania Ministries. I was part of Teen Mania, if you remember the old Acquire the Fire youth conferences.
Oh, yeah.
Run Loose.
White Cross.
Oh, yeah. White Cross and POD and, everybody. That was like the heyday for missions. I mean, Teen Mania took tens of thousands of kids overseas on missions. Ceased to exist around 2012. And so I'm a total geek about this, but you go on Google Ngram. Google Ngram, you type in a word, it shows its usage over time. Okay, so you see when a word comes into use and when it slips out of our vernacular. And I'm typing in short-term missions or mission trips. And I'm seeing like this rise, and then through the 90s and 2000s, and then 2012, it wasn't only Teen Mania, but there was this massive dip. Boom.
Wow.
Teen Mania closes down. Short-term missions is nowhere to be heard. There's also some other links that we started doing short-term missions through the church, not through the agency, but the church wasn't quite prepared. And so, but now here we are sitting in 2022, and there's not those opportunities that existed in my youth. I went to Russia when I was 14 years old, blasted my world apart. And I think it's been so positive if it connects to a long-term vision. And
well, look at you. You're an example of it. Because you went on short-term missions and it spurred you on to want to go and do long-term. And that's what I think is the result of short-term missions. If we don't expose people to these missions work, then how are you going to produce the next generation of missionaries? You have to get them out there.
But what about those people then who don't go, or they come home and they had a terrible experience, got diarrhea, and never want to do that again?
Well, then that's between them and God. But our purpose is to make the missions exciting and let them see how we don't make it exciting. We just let them see we're doing what we do every day. When you come on a mission trip, we don't make our budget. We don't charge people anything to come on a mission trip. Number one, I don't like that when people charge to go. We're like, we buy your tickets. We're going to see God provide for everything when you get there. Just buy your tickets and let's go. Whatever it costs, you cover that. We're not going to make our budget from that. We walk by faith. God provides all of our needs because we do His will. And
well, I'm going to pause you right there before your next thought. I'm sorry. I'm going to pause you right there before your next thought, because you talk about doing everything the wrong way. And here's another thing you guys are doing completely different from every other organization I've ever heard. What do you mean? You have them buy their tickets and then you take care of everything on the ground?
Yeah. And God told me to do that. And I had a pastor say, that's a horrible idea. You're going to get in trouble. I'm like, it's not my idea. I was like, it's not even my money. So it doesn't matter. It's God's money. But our purpose is to raise up the next generation of missions and get them excited. And so when somebody asked me this year, a pastor asked me, how do you fundraise? I said, we do the will of God. I said, I'm fundraising right now. I'm out here administered in this village. When I'm doing the will of God, God's providing the funds for His will. Awesome. And so it doesn't take me supporting God. God actually supports us. So when we do His will. So I do ask that they cover like $60 a day when they're there to cover their needs. But none of that money goes to me. That's the actual cost of them being there. And like when you give to a well, that money doesn't go to support our family. That goes to a well. If you pay $38,000 for a well, that's to cover for that. And they said, well, you should take a percentage and cover your costs. I'm like, yeah, but then I wouldn't really be having faith that God will provide. So I'm like, I'm going to have faith that God's going to provide, and God's going to prove His faithfulness because we're going to be faithful to His vision. But the short-term stuff, man, it's so exciting. You know that book, Wild at Heart, there's 3 things God created a man to do: an adventure to live, a battle to fight, and a princess to rescue. There's this adventure spirit in us. And, man, you can do that here. One pastor that came, Pastor Jonathan Stockstill from Bethany World Prayer Center, he started Missions Monday, and every Monday he has his whole staff go and do missions work on Monday in their city. They go under the bridge, they go find people. And this is not like doctor's visit. You can't go to the hospital and say, I visited Uncle George and prayed for him. He's like, no, that's pastoral. He's like, you need to do missions work. You need to go do mission stuff. Because I tell people you can do the same thing we're doing here in Kenya in your own town. Just go knock on doors, bring a wad of money in your pocket, Ask them what you can pray for. Ask them what their needs are. Tell them you love them, and there's no agenda. You don't need their information. Just tell them you're there to bring the kingdom forward.
I think one of the reasons we don't do missions or short-term missions has got swept under the rug or taken off the list of things to do during COVID because we got tight on our budget and can't keep the lights on with missions is because we have the wrong idea about it. Missions is sending your high priority people who you need in the church. We can't let them go. But what really takes place is they go, they get fired up to see God at work in the world. They come back and the blaze has such a great potential to start in that local context. It's not the over there missions. It's the simultaneous local and global interaction, that catalytic kind of event that takes place and then sets that city or that zip code on fire. I see that potential. Yeah.
It's very contagious. And one of the pastors that he came back and said, I want to send out 300 missionaries next year. He came this summer with us. He said, I want to send out 300 missionaries on short-term trips to, promote long-term. And when he put the sign up for it, 500 signed up the first day.
No way. Wow.
And so now he has like 25 trips going to all kind of countries around the world. And so I'm like, if you're a pastor out there and you put it out there to say, hey, we're going to do missions trips. We're going to go visit these people we've been supporting a long time. We're going to bring them into the church to share testimonies. You better build a new building or 5 new buildings because your church is going to quadruple because people are going to be excited about something. People come back from mission trips excited. They're like so excited, like, oh my God, this changed me forever. And so short-term missions, man, is so needed. Long-term missions are needed, hybrid missions, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. Listen, It is needed to move the kingdom forward. There's no one way to do it, but we have to do it together. And the truth is, the people that came on those short-term missions, they're going to come back and do what they did there in their own town. I believe that.
Amen. Yeah, that I'm so encouraged to hear this kind of conversation because I often have conversations with people who are in ministry and maybe on the field they're welcoming, but they have seen such a poor example of how missions is done wrong. And you're talking about the blaze. And really, it's going back to that whole simple byline of, let's say, this podcast. Know God's heart, join his mission. We catch a glimpse, we want more, and we got to get somewhere. It doesn't matter the geographic location so much as it matters that the heart of God beats for every individual. Kind of changing gears here, before we kind of bring it to a close, I wanted to hear more about South Sudan because when you mention South Sudan, I think it ranks high on the most impoverished countries in the world. You know more about it than me. What are the biggest challenges you face, and what are the biggest opportunities or breakthroughs you've seen?
So I first went to South Sudan in 2019 and visited with a missionary, a guy who's from that country, John Duet Dewang, who's one of the original Lost Boys of South Sudan, who fought in the 21-year battle, was shot, raised in a refugee camp, just an amazing story. Started an orphanage in the desert. People said he was crazy. There was no water. Airplane crashes into his property, and a guy gets out. He helps him, and the guy does well for him. And it's like, my God, he always just says, my God will provide. And honestly, he's a lot of the inspiration for what we do, because I sat in his little hut in 2019 and he just looked at me with a smile like, my God will provide. Don't you know how great our God is? And the guy has nothing. And now he's building 2 like $40,000 dormitories for his orphanage that is growing tremendously right now. We just got him funded through my friend his renewed missions agency, Justin Kelly, just funded these 2 orphanages over there. So we went to see John do it. He was very inspiring. But this country, it's been a country for a very short while, and through the leadership of John Garang, and it's not very stable. There's no central. If you go to fly into Juba, now we cross over the Kenyan border, so we're by Kenya and Ethiopia in this north eastern side of South Sudan. It's very remote. There's not any cell service. You can't bring satellite phones. They consider that terrorism. And everyone has guns and no pants. I don't know where they keep the ammo, but everybody has guns and no clothes. And they're all walking around with AKs. So this gun is just war torn. This country is just war torn. And whoever has a gun is the government. So wherever they're at, if you're at the border and these guys are drunk and they got guns pointed at you, like this time I got hit in the back of the head and drug off and interrogated on the way out, and at 50 calibers and RPGs pointed at our Land Cruiser, and we're getting out with our hands up like, we're out here to help you. Wow. But, they need the gospel. And I see these people come and they go to the capital of Juba, and they'll see a lot of people into Christ, but then it's hard to get them out to the further parts that need the gospel. And I can't physically continue to cross that border. It's just not safe for me. I would do it if God told me to, and he told me to this year. And I would do it again if he told me to, but he would have to really I'm gonna have to see 2 burning bushes to go again. So I'm just going to be honest, because that was a rough trip this time, but we drove our vehicle there. I was the only Caucasian guy crossing that border, and we drove like 8 hours across the border. I lost 4-wheel drive. We're winching out of holes to try to get through these rivers and all. And we get to this remote village of the Toposa tribe that we're going to drill this well in. But my drilling rig, not mine, the one I hired, was stuck in the mud for 7 days. And I passed that drilling rig, and I need the drilling rig there first to show that we mean business, that we're not coming to take advantage of them. And so for me to show up without the drilling rig in a place where there's a lot of guns and all, it doesn't look good. Like, no. I need that drilling rig there. So I'm like really upset. Now I'm into this trip, 28 hours of driving, and we're into this area. There's no stores. There's no nothing. There's nothing anywhere around us. And we brought enough food and diesel just to make it there and back, because you can't buy any there. And I see this rig and I'm discouraged, and I drive on about another hour and a half, 2 hours to get to this village. And I get there and I'm still like, what am I going to do? The drilling rig's not here. I got to tell them we're here to help them. So I got out my first aid kit. I asked for their sick. I started just bandaging wounds to try to show that I come in peace. And I have some guys that can interpret the Toposa language. So I start to tell the chief, what we're doing. So he gathers the whole tribe together, have all the women and men separated, and says, I need you to address the tribe. I said, okay. So I get up and I tell them, we come in the name of the one true God, Jesus. He's not made of stone or wood, but who made all stone and wood and made us. And the way that he's real is that John Dewitt prayed and we're here and we're coming to do water. But the God we serve is not just something you look at. He actually answers us when we talk to him. And when you pray to him, he listens and responds. And I said, the way he's real is that when you pray for help, he comes to our rescue. And when I said that, the ground began to rumble. And I'm like, what's going on? And everybody gets up and starts yelling. That big old giant tank of a drilling rig comes driving into the village. As soon as I said, the God we serve comes to rescue. And I fell on my knees. And it was like
an Elijah. It's like an Elijah versus Baal prophets kind of.
It was like, I felt I could not see. You ever ate something where your eyes you can't see? Like my eyes, I couldn't see. I was just weeping. I was on my knees, and I was just thanking God for his faithfulness to show up. Because I said, you are the God who shows up to rescue. And you have to believe in your heart that he is that God and that he will show up. And so I didn't know, but my friend Nixon Zagaba was filming the whole thing. So I go back and I'm looking at the film. When I fell on my knees and I'm just thanking God, the whole tribe fell on their knees. And they're behind me with their hands raised on their knees, worshiping God with the presence of God falling. And
is this considered like an unreached area?
Yeah, of course. Like when I talked to the chief, he said years ago, a priesthood came to tell them the stories of God, but this generation has never heard them. There's no churches, there's no Bibles, there's no schools, there's no hospitals, no education. There's just tribe. And so we bring them back, tell them the gospel story. They all give their life to Christ. We drill the well. We go back to the village, bring the Jesus film in their language, bring multiple solar audio Bibles so they have the complete Bible with songs and stories and teachings in their language over there. But that's just one of the stories of how when you really believe in your heart that God is the God that shows up, man, he loves to come to bat. He loves to hit it out the park. He's just such a cool God.
God is such a cool guy. Quotation by Joye Dicharry. And I think a lot of times we don't see these kind of supernatural events because we don't dare enough or don't risk enough or don't take that step of faith. And it sounds crazy, puts us in an awkward position. I mean, you're in an awkward position. I'm thankful that I have some of these experiences as well. trekking through China and showing up at United Wastate Army barracks, AK-47s, child soldiers. It's cool to tell these stories. But unless there's an element of risk in our endeavors for God, there's no need for faith. I think Hudson Taylor used to say that.
That's right.
And that risk aspect leads to a deeper understanding of who God is, because he doesn't, these are normal situations. The supernatural should be normalized, but in this world, they're not. His kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. That's when normalization of supernatural events take place, I think.
Amen.
So you have these crazy stories. The ministry's moving and growing. The story is not done being told. It's still going to be told. What is it that you hope to set in motion during your lifetime? What's your overarching goal here?
I just want to do God's will. I mean, I used to think my intention used to be, let me make sure I do it right, because people before me didn't get some things right. And just the logical part of me is like, I need to figure out what they did wrong and correct it and do it right. And I was sitting and talking with a pastor friend of mine, and he said, legacy is really kind of prideful. He said, you really need to focus on just the generation you have, and don't worry about the people coming after you, that God will raise up people in those generations, but you need to worry about doing God's will in your generation. And I took that word to heart and said, I know legacy is important because we want to represent Christ with our life, but I can't be worried about whether people are going to follow what I did in the next generation. I have to be worried about being used by God 100% in this generation. And so what I want to see happen in my lifetime is people see that missions can be done with the whole family. It can be healthy. My oldest son is 17. And he chooses to come in the mission field, but I give him that choice. This last year that we went, I told him, if you want to stay home, you can. And it's okay, but I want to know where you're at. And he told me, I want to come because I want to give a voice to the people that don't have a voice. When we drive the dirt bike through those dry riverbeds and we find them women digging deep holes to try to get water, and we say, where is your village? It's different when people come to you and ask you to bring water, but when people don't have a voice, you find the people and you give them a voice, and that means something. And so I asked him, I said, what is it that you don't like the most about being in Kenya? And so he told me he just didn't like these big services where there was a lot of people and the music was loud and going. And I said, well, what if you didn't have to go to that? And he goes, really? And I said, yeah. I said, what if I'm thankful for what you want to give, and I'll just use that. And so I made the arrangement with him that, hey, you come, you don't have to go to those services. I want him to be at those services. It's my heart as a father that he wants to be at that. But if he doesn't want to be there, it's not really helping me to make him be there. And so I'm thankful for what he brings to the table. You know what? He came to all of those services except one in that year.
Wow.
But that was on his choice.
Sure.
To come and fly the drone and take pictures. But I think it's important as a parent to take into account where your kids are at in this journey. They're coming with you. You have a responsibility to make sure that their heart is right in this. And so I want people to know that missions can be healthy. There's been missionaries that have come back, and it's been family problems and issues. And listen, that is not the will of God to see you sacrifice your family for the kingdom. Our family is our testimony. God uses the picture of family and husband and wife so much in the Word of God, and children. And so I think that he has put that idea out there. He created it. And so he wants it to look healthy. So I want people to see that family missions is healthy, just like you and your wife are doing. And I would think in this lifetime, I would like that to be seen, that family missions is doable and it's healthy.
That's a powerful message, and one that is not often told. My friend Dave Eubank, Free Burma Rangers, does crazy stuff with his kids. They know they're I think him and his son Peter are in Iraq or Syria right now. He's hard to keep track of, but I mean, they're taking their kids to conflict areas and dangerous places, but it's their choice. And I love the idea of family missions. I remember going on some early mission trips when I first moved to China, and I was with my mentor, who's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His wife's Malaysian, and I followed him everywhere I went. He always took his kids. Christopher was 1 at the time. Jared was like 4. And everywhere we went, and police would come and interrogations happen, but those 2 little kids are right there. It set up my life, my future life with my family, for a positive idea of what could be doing family missions. I also like how you said legacy is maybe all about you. And I've really been drawn to this idea of setting things in motion. And I think that's something, setting something in motion is not about you. It's about momentum. It's about a ripple effect that far surpasses your reach at present.
I agree.
So, yeah, that's really powerful, man. I appreciate this conversation. I think there's so much more to be shared. Maybe we'll have to do this again, but Joel, I really appreciate you coming on and, man, sharing your heart. What's one final word of encouragement that you would give to someone who's maybe watching? They're like, man, I want to be of use to God, like you were talking about earlier. I haven't felt like I've been of use to God for a long time. What would you say to that person?
I would say that all of your best abilities and things you have that you think you bring to the table is not what God needs. He just needs your yes. And that the idea that anywhere that we're strong is a place that God can't use, but it's in the areas that we're weak. It's in the things that are beyond our ability that he has a chance to use his abilities. And so if you're not thinking of doing things with God that are beyond your abilities, then you're not leaving a place for God to shine. So if you think I can't be a missionary because I don't have this ability, then you're the best candidate for a missionary. If you're thinking, I can't go witness because I'm not good with this, then you're the best candidate, because that's the place that God can come in. It's only through our weakness that he's able to be strong in us. So I would say embrace your weakness, as Paul says. Embrace the things that you think that are holding you back and say, I'm just going to say yes to you, even though I don't have this ability. And the things that you do have as your greatest abilities, think of Paul, all the studying he did, all the things he did in the Jewish law. God didn't need any of that for his calling. God needed him to be something different. And so all the things that I did in my life, I thought I brought to the table to help God out, only got in the way. And I'm not saying God doesn't use things in my life that I have as experiences, but it was only okay once he was using them. I wasn't. And so think of the things that you say, I wish people come to me and say, Joe, I wish I could do what you do. Or your friend from the Free Burma Rangers, I watch him like, man, what a champion for the kingdom. But I no longer wish to be other people. I wish for God to use me through my weaknesses. And it's not always fun to have your weaknesses exposed. But once they're out there, God can use them for whatever he wants. And that's what's good. And so I think for us, we have seen God just use our weaknesses and come in and be our strength. And people mistake the successes in Commission Mankind for our doing. And it's 100% God's doing and things we were incapable of.
That's a powerful way to end this conversation, I think. And Joel, bro, thank you for coming on and sharing your heart. Man, it's been an honor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on here. I can keep on doing the great things that you're doing, and just keep on bringing the conversation to light to make him known. I love it. So keep up the great work yourself.
Thank you, my friend. Amen. I shall do. And man, I don't think you need to hear anything else from me at the end of this conversation. Take Joel's words to heart. It is in your weakness that God is going to do incredible things far beyond your wildest imagination. And but make yourself available. Say that first yes. I remember Jim Elliot used to say, it's hard for God to steer a parked car. Be in momentum. Trail the footsteps of your master. And when you do, he can maneuver you into those places that he wants to use you.
Missions Pulse. Know God's heart, join his mission. This podcast is powered by unreached Global. Subscribe, watch, and listen on YouTube today. Visit missionspulse.com.